Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we're going to be talking about the internship program we do. It's a kind of in a mob programming format, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe Austin, you can kind of walk us through what it's like and maybe some of the key details.
Yeah. So I think, some high level points, kind of like overall agenda is like the hiring, the onboarding, and then like what they do, and then maybe how it wraps up. And the mob and ensemble is all throughout indeed. And I think I can give like the hiring process in recent years, 'cause that's kind of like the more remote form. I might need you to fill in for the in-person form because it was different then, um so the hiring process, the overall goal is we're looking for people, kind of like similar to like a intro or entry role, is we're looking for people who learn really, really well and work really well with others, right? Once the format we do is similar to, if any of you have been to our conference events where people come into a big Zoom meeting or something, and then they get dished out to individual mobs, and then people will mob for a couple hours and we come back for a retro kind of thing. So a similar thing happens. We take all the candidates who want to do an internship. We give them a little introduction talk to the organization, how we work, what is mob programming, what's about to happen, what we're looking for. And then, for as many people we have, I think it's like 10 to 20 candidates, and then they each get put into a mob of about 5, I believe. And then in each mob is someone who already is in the organization and is helping to evaluate. And actually, there's 2 people in each mob. There's someone who facilitates the mob, and then there's someone who is observing, and then they take them aside for one-on-one Q&A for about 10 minutes. And so so they all get to do that. And I've been the intro person, I've been the Q&A person, I've been the facilitator for all these. And so it's a lot of fun. And it's a great mix. So in about an hour and a half to 2 hours, you interview a big amount of people and you see how they interact with the mob. You see how they interact one-on-one. You see how they TDD or not TDD. And you see how they respond to, kind of the facilitator's promptings. I remember one of the facilitators who is in our organization, he was saying how there was one mob of candidates, and one of them was trying really hard to navigate TDD, and the rest did not want to. So he was trying to be like, oh, TDD is what we're trying to do and encourage, but the rest just kind of took over and did non-TDD type stuff. And so but the one person was doing a good job of trying to encourage the right behaviors and things. And so that's how it's been more recently. How was it back in the non-remote days, Chris?
Yeah, one thing that happens both remote and back when we were not remote was that I want to highlight is those interviews, those 10-minute interviews are actually while everybody else keeps working. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
yeah. And so I think like the thought around that a little bit was, how do people feel about leaving the work and the ownership of that, or if they were just navigating, can they pass it to somebody else successfully, that sort of thing. But yeah, in non-remote, so we would always get hundreds of applicants, and then we would always narrow them down to some manageable amount. When we went remote, we used to schedule many interviews, inviting 6 people, expecting a few no-shows, and then they would mob together normally at a traditional workstation. The transition to remote made it a lot easier to do it like we'd been doing the conference and just interview 20 people at a time, and that worked out really well. And we were looking for things like collaboration, as you said, going in the right direction and not ignoring people. We had some really, really, really smart people that were just stomping all over everybody else and making them feel awful. We had all kinds of like behaviors that we saw, and I think the mob interview tells a lot of behavioral aspects that and we even explicitly say, like, you are working well together with people you're competing with as well. Like, we're looking for working well even with when you're competing with the people that you're trying to work with. Um, and so that all was has been very interesting, but very successful, I think, in the candidate selection. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of the people who was on my mob at the time came out of one of the sessions just blown away by how great some of the candidates were. So it's usually we have the problem of too many great people.
Yeah.
So, if there's like, 4 spots and there's 7 people who get the highest score possible, that's a tough spot to be in, but also a very good spot, right? Because those people not only are smart and effective and can program well, but work well with others and also have some good practices and learn well. So it's like a lot of good things come together, and mentor, kind of can tutor others well. And so, but yeah, it lets you see the kind of talent you're looking for very quickly, which is a lot of fun. And
I think
so,
also
mhm.
we can be very lean in the selection process. So I know other internship programs, they take months to hire. We have like a set, since it's our HR department that puts on the internship program, we have a set time where we can hire. So typically, the job postings go up February 1st, they come down March 1st. And then we can just say, okay, we want to interview these 40 people out of the hundreds of applicants. That then gets scheduled into 2 of these kind of mass interviews, and then we can give a prioritized list based on ascending score list, right? And then they just keep calling people until they fill all the spots. So we actually have the group of people that we want hired in essentially no time at all. And then that's after that's done, then the internships last for the whole summer. So that process has been very effective for us. So.
Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so then after hiring, there's kind of a little bit of a lull before the summer, but in that space is preparations for the interns to start. And so essentially the structure, if I'm remembering correctly, is let's say 3 or 4 people were hired as interns. They will form their own mob, and that mob will work with someone inside the organization to satisfy a customer need of some kind, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think they usually get to pick, right, from a list. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
maybe a few details I can add. So
Okay. Yeah.
early on, we actually, when we were in person doing this, we were like, oh, the interns can just join a mob, right? And so they would work with the senior engineers, and we'd have like that skill diversity thing going on. That was really good for the candidate, but I think there was kind of this HR requirement of a presentation of the value they added to the organization at the end. And it was interesting because like at first I was thinking, well, that's not necessarily what we want to do, but we have to kind of participate within this framework. But I think in the end it kind of became good because it provided a little bit of a focusing lens on what we were having them do. So later, then they became their own mob, responsible for their own work, and then they worked together to produce something. And what was nice was, I could look at all the things that we wanted to do as an organization in software, and then provide some opportunity for them to think up their own idea. But if they can't think of something, then I've started to have like kind of a list prepared of things, valuable work that the software team probably will never get to. And so those are the kind of the 2 categories of work made available to them. Or maybe it's like something years and years out that we may eventually do or something. And that has been a good balance. So if they're particularly creative or inventive, then they might come up with their own idea and get it vetted by actual product owners, or they would kind of choose from this list of stuff that we know is already going to be valuable, right?
Nice, nice. Yeah, exactly. And that highlights some of the preparation that goes behind the scenes. So before they arrive, there's a couple different roles that I've noticed, at least in the past few years, that get selected from people who are already part of kind of the mobbing organization and culture and product teams. Is someone becomes like their I don't know, their shepherd for the internship. So they're their go-to person for anything, basically. It's almost like the buddy system. It's like the buddy for all the interns. And so like if they're having, technical issues setting up a repo or, a mob station or something like that, that person will join their mob and help out. And so there's that kind of role. There's a few people who take on kind of traditional time card type stuff, right? And that kind of role. And then there's just kind of like itinerant mobbers who will come in and teach something formally, so either hey, the last couple hours of Friday I'll join you guys and we'll learn about DevOps stuff, or we'll learn about testing legacy code. So it's going to be almost like a formal lesson, almost like a learning time lesson. Or also and actually this is the role I've taken on most, is they join at the time when they're struggling to test something. So I remember there was an intern team once that they got something to work with, like serverless code, gathering data from one thing and storing it somewhere, and then doing some security handshakes. But all of it was untested. So basically they just generated a bunch of legacy code, right? And they're like, how do we test this? And so I joined them for a while to walk through, like, oh, here's how we can make a seam. Here's how we can unit test this. And so then there's these kind of itinerant mobbers who will join in and out to help them learn a thing or two as the internship goes. But I suspect a lot of it, which is probably why there'll be a part 2 of this that will describe it in more detail, because we know several people who've been through this process.
Yeah.
If we can get them on to describe what it's like at those moments when someone like me is not there, right? So you're sitting there with 3 other interns, and you have a problem, a business problem you're trying to solve, and you're researching and solving it together. So, yep. So I suspect that's 80-90% of their time is they're in that mode. Yeah.
It's a lot of searching. I
Yeah.
do. I expect quite a lot more like Chat GPT sort of use coming up, but and I think that's going to provide a new dynamic actually.
Ooh, yeah.
Because there's all sorts of things that can go right with that, and all sorts of things that can go wrong. Yeah, and I think during the time that they're working on things, they're working towards a goal. Then they're going to prepare a presentation on that, and then talk about the business value that they've been a part of, their experiences. And our HR organization also puts on a number of events so that they can go and see customer installations and other things like that. So there's a lot of great stuff. Because of the kind of customer field trips, the role is a little bit hybrid, not purely remote, but so those are maybe some details that might be interesting to people. But they mob most of the time remotely, using the same tools that any other software engineer does, and it works quite well.
Yeah, and it definitely has that from a kind of a product side. They get to experience what it's like to do thin vertical slices and not thin vertical slices, because that's something, when I'll come in and join sometimes, be like, I see you're making this big thing here. Is it possible to make it a smaller thing that you could demo to your contact sooner? That kind of discussion happens good. But then at the end, they do have that presentation at the end where they kind of get that experience of making something and presenting something and kind of demonstrating. And so that it helps those skills as well. So, I mean, I think it's interpersonal because you're mobbing a lot. It's technical because you're doing a lot of technical stuff. It's product thinking because you're either making an enhancement to a product or making a new product of some kind. And then it's also kind of speaking skills from all the navigation and also the speaking at the end and presentation. And so, I feel like, it's biased opinion, but it seems like, hey, that seems like a pretty good flex of a lot of different skills for an intern. I think when I reflect on it, it's interesting because, the first model you're talking about where they would join a team, an existing team, I feel like that probably has less, what's the right word for it? Maybe frustration zone, or in like kind of the fluent edge thinking, because
Yeah.
you're in there with seniors and they can help kind of like, hey, here's what we're working on, and kind of scale it and kind of facilitate a mob. And they're just a member of an existing mob, kind of like jumping on a moving train. Where when you start a team with 3 to 4 people, and you do have someone kind of like a senior person in the back of the room who will come in and out, but you're going to have to learn reteaming or teaming on your own, probably by fire quite a bit,
Yeah.
more so than in the first way it was done. So that might lead to frustration, but probably a lot of good learning too. So
Yeah, and it depends on their dynamic,
yeah,
because I think in the original role, the intern would join and more or less just try and fit in, and so there was a lot of that learning that just didn't exist for them, and it was hard to see. I think to the point that the HR organization wanted to see, it was hard to see their individual contribution to the end product. Like, yes, they got a lot of learning, and yes, they were prime hiring candidates out of it, but it lacked a little bit of that fluent edge and back and forth. So I actually prefer this way now more.
yeah, and it leans towards your chaos monkey mode. So
Yes.
very good, very good. Well, I think one thing that's been cool about it all is many have finished their school journey and then come and joined us later, and that's been fantastic because they uh, they know the deal. They know what it's like. They know exactly what they're getting into, and we know who we're hiring, and so that's been really fun to see. And yeah, I think it's been beneficial for both, and even those who go somewhere else. I've seen them talk about the things they learned and how after one internship they are an influencer with test-driven development at a new organization,
Yeah.
and so yeah, so that's fun for them. So yeah, any other closing thoughts on this one, Chris?
Yeah, well, I had one more thread I wanted to pull on, which was the
Mm.
what happens after
Yes.
they come through it. So toward the end, so we had some interesting learnings as we went along with the internship. One was, we did hire a lot of our former interns when we were hiring, shortly after, and it was very valuable. That was great. And in general, I think that's been successful every time. I think another thing that we heard was when we didn't have positions open and people were looking for other jobs. One thing was, we don't do estimation in our organization, and so we had some angry feedback from former interns saying that they didn't learn anything about estimation, and they were asked about it during their job interviews, and essentially weren't selected because they never estimated any of their work. So we do kind of like a little bit of a parting course on we don't do this here, but other people do that there. So there is kind of like we spent a couple of hours going over, like, you're more likely to find Scrum than Kanban out in the wild. This is what waterfall looks like. This is what estimation looks like. This is what story points look like. Just so that they're prepared on the way out. And so, I found that an interesting piece of feedback, and I did feel bad about that person's experience. And so it was good that that came up. And so it's kind of like what you're most likely to find out in the wild course. And yeah, so those might be my final notes on that.
Yeah.
I really love the internship process and what it's become. We also do retrospectives at the end of each one from the team side, and so just kind of always doing the Kaizen thing. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember joining some of those and talking about Scrum and Dark Scrum and some of those that final parting before, like, oh, what you might see out in the wild kind of thing. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, retrospectives throughout. Yeah, I think that was good too for the interns to learn that process. And yeah, I think we'll call this one a wrap. But yeah, if you all or any of you are involved in an internship program, we'd love to hear how you do it, what works, what's not working so well. Yeah, and so please share this episode with somebody if you feel like this style or one facet of this style might help someone else. And yeah, please reach out to us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and more with your comments and feedback. And until next time, have a good one, y'all. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everybody.